Okay, can people hear me? Okay, good. So, Suzanne, I'm glad you made it. Looks like you're driving. Can you unmute yourself?
I am not driving. I am a passenger. Just
okay.
Safety first. My driver is right here.
Okay. Where are you headed?
Hi, sorry. We were out talking to voters. I'm running for office right now, so we were out talking to voters. So I'm sorry to be in a vehicle, but
no
we
problem.
appreciate the opportunity to meet with you. It's such an honor. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, we're honored to have you. And so are you going to be getting home and then having to make a transition to the house, or how are you going to do that?
It doesn't matter. I am going to get to my friend Katie's house, and then I will just stay there for the rest of the meeting. Okay.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So let me just give a little summary of the format tonight. I'm going to introduce our speakers in just a second, and then let them introduce themselves just briefly. I've got a list of about 20 questions, and I know it's a lot, but I think some of them will go quicker than others, and so hopefully we can get through them. And I may need to encourage people to sort of move along in the answers. So keep your answers fairly brief. And what we're going to do, we're going to try and take about 35 minutes till about 25 till 8. And then we'll have a little brief pause, and people can donate using the link online for just a few minutes. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So everybody, please be getting your notepad out and jotting down questions that you might want to ask, and then we'll let you ask them. And so I just want to welcome everybody that's online here. Sorry we had to do it this way. We couldn't get the chapel because they had choir practice, and it was getting pushed back later and later. And I didn't want to do that because campaign season is upon us. And Labor Day's the typical kickoff, but ballots go out in mid-October. And that's coming up in a month and a half.
Yeah.
And so anyway, without further ado, let me introduce our two panelists. Elizabeth Waite, who most of you know from our own congregation. Wave your hand there, Elizabeth. And then Suzanne Harrison. Where'd you go, Suzanne? Oh, there you are. Suzanne, please keep your mic on. And the other people are muted, but and then when it gets to the Q&A, we'll open it up. So Elizabeth, why don't you just give a brief background on how you got into politics, what you were doing before that, and then we'll get into more details later.
Okay. So I taught school in the neighborhood at two different high schools in the neighborhood. While I was just before I retired, I started getting a few years before I retired, I started getting really watchful of the state legislature. So on my personal leave days, I split them up and went every Wednesday afternoon to the legislature to watch committee hearings and see what was going and be in session in the afternoon. So I spent an afternoon a week on my personal leave time up there. And then when I was campaigning with my representative at the time, he actually suggested that I consider running for office because he wasn't going to run again. And that was Representative Larry Wiley.
And about what year was this?
That was the race of 2014. And so I got to watch that next session after that election. I got to watch how things were going in the legislature with it in mind that, what if I were down there? What would I be doing? So it just kind of raised the awareness of the process and what I was watching. So I decided to run based on Larry's invitation. The other little part of that was interesting is that Larry did not win that election in 2014. I rarely talk about that because this seat has been a Democrat seat for over 30 years.
Okay.
And a Republican had it for 2 years, and they thought she was going to hold on to it, and she didn't. So I flipped that seat in 2016. And the other thing that I'm now talking about that more because 2016, nobody really noticed. But anyway, that's how I got.
What were you teaching before you got into politics?
Oh, I was teaching language arts, English.
English.
My students thought I was teaching social studies half the time.
Okay, we got to move along.
Right.
Suzanne, why don't you give us your background a little bit?
Yeah, my name is Suzanne Harrison. I am a local medical doctor down in Riverton area. I live in the Sandy Draper area, and really, I got interested in public service when I volunteered in my daughter's kindergarten class, and there were 29 children in our little local public school class and one teacher. And I remember volunteering, trying to help all the different kids with their different needs and thinking, oh my word, how can any teacher, no matter how great they are, meet the needs of 29 5-year-olds in one classroom with no help? And I remember thinking, someone should do something about this. Someone should help. But it wasn't until a few years later that it really hit me that I could be the one to try and help. And really, all of you here on this call want to help, and you are helping in so many ways. And to me, that's all politics and policy making is trying to help your community. So I initially ran in 2016. I lost that election by 3 votes out of almost 17,000 votes. So your vote is truly your superpower. I won decisively in 2018. I got gerrymandered out of the seat in 2021. And now my commitment to serving remains strong. So I filed to run for the Salt Lake County Council at large. I will continue to finish out my term in the legislature through the end of this year. And I'm just honored to join you, and thank you for letting me participate.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. What kind of medical doctor are you?
I'm an anesthesiologist.
Anesthesiologist.
I work in the operating room.
Okay. So you're not going to put us all to sleep, are you?
No. Well, I know how to do that at work. I try not to do it in other times.
Okay. Okay.
No guarantees.
Just a rough attempt at some humor. So
I liked it. It was good, Mark. I liked it.
So anyway, I was going to read through the Unitarian 7 or 8 principles, but I'm not going to read them. I'm going to just give the highlights, just so, because it relates to what we're talking about tonight. And number 1, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Well, I guess I will read them. We believe in justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Number 3, we accept one another and encourage spiritual growth in our congregations. Number 4, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Number 5, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregation. and in the society at large. That's what we're talking about tonight. The goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all is number 6. Number 7 is respect for the inherent web of all existence of which we are a part. That's the environment. And then number 8, they've made it too long, so my abbreviated version is journeying towards spiritual wholeness by dismantling racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. So that's what we're about. I think most people in Utah would agree with that, regardless of what religion you are adhere to. And tonight, we're not going to promote any party or any candidate. As a church, we're not supposed to do that, but we are going to talk about issues that relate to these very topics that I just discussed. So, first of all, I want to talk about what they do teach in civics class, since the title of this program is what they don't teach you in civics class, the Utah Legislature. So maybe, Elizabeth, you could start off by just telling how many representatives there are, how many senators there are in the state of Utah, and about how many of those are Democrats, how many are Republicans.
Okay. And then I do want to mention one other thing, because there actually, people don't know this because it feels like it isn't a requirement. In the state of Utah, there is a requirement for public school students to complete one semester of a course called Government and Citizenship. It's the civics class, one semester, and kids usually take it the second half of their senior year when they are absolutely tuned out. So they don't realize that they are required to take a civics class, and that's why people don't even realize it's a requirement. They also are required to take what is called a civics test in order to complete high school. It is not a civics test, it's just called that, but it's in state code. It's the only test that's in state code, but we do have those two requirements. So in the government and citizenship class, we do learn, and it is taught, the three branches of government at the state level that in Utah pretty much parallel the federal government. So we've got the governor's office and the state offices in the executive branch. Legislative lawmaking branch are the State House of Representatives and the State Senate. That's a total of 104 legislators, 75 in the House, 29 in the Senate. And then the judicial branch, which is represented at the Capitol with the Supreme Court, which has 5 members, 3 of them now women as of about 3 weeks ago.
You said 29 senators?
29 senators, and
okay.
6 of them are Democrats. 4 of those are women. There is only 1 Republican woman in the state Senate. In the House of 75 members, there are 17 Democrats, 12 of which are women. And I think there are now 10 women in the House Republicans. And they're making a big deal out of working to get more Republican women. But I'm fascinated at how Republican women don't represent women's issues in the same way as we might expect. Just so I'm looking at notes that Mark supplied. Our state school board is now a partisan election. It used to be a nonpartisan election for state school board members. It became partisan 3 or 4 years ago. Local school board are still nonpartisan. So the school district boards of education, they're nonpartisan. They do run primaries to narrow the field. In my neighborhood, the field got narrowed in a primary from 4 candidates to 2. And And so they're still nonpartisan.
Can I interrupt real quickly?
Sure.
The other part of government is judges. And we always get our ballots, and there are all these judges on there.
Oh, good.
And I never know how to pick them. But my wife, her technique is she says, if you don't know, vote for the woman judge.
I think that's a good idea. But just so you know how that works, we do not elect judges in our state. And we hear about judicial elections in other states, which is so dangerous and so unfortunate. And we've seen the outcome of that. But we do not elect judges in our state. We go through an appointment process where there's a vetting. Our Supreme Court judges, for example, have extensive backgrounds and are highly educated and qualified. But then after they're nominated and their appointments concurred in the state Senate and they're sworn in, then they after, and I'm trying to remember, I think it's a year, but then every 10 years, Supreme Court judges, and then the periods are a little bit different on different judges levels, but they go through what are called retention elections. So that's how their names appear on the ballot.
So you can vote them out. But
yeah.
Okay, that's
and there actually is really good information
online
about those judges online. And I happen to be a commissioner on what's called the Judicial Conduct Commission.
Okay.
Whenever a judge anywhere in the state does something that someone considers unethical, they can file a complaint, and we receive that complaint and review them. Over 95% of those complaints are about the judgment about a ruling that the judge made. That's not something that we deal with. That's not considered unethical, no matter how much anybody thinks it is. But all of that background is available, so you can look at it.
Okay. So just going down the list of questions, Suzanne, why don't you take this one? Discuss how a bill becomes law, and what's the best time or when are bills introduced? And what is required for a bill to be filed? I mean, can you tackle that one, Suzanne?
Sure can. Yes, no problem. So a bill becomes a law. The first step is the idea for the bill, and that often comes from constituents that let us know something that's on their mind. And then we research it along with the help of the attorneys in the legislature. We have our own set of attorneys that help us research questions, policy questions, and help draft the law. Once the law, draft the bill.
Yeah. What's the latest that you can present? Like if I had an idea for a bill, a law today, could it get in the legislature this year?
Yes, it would just depend on if you got a legislator that shared your commitment to that idea and would file the bill. So most of the time, bills are only considered and made into laws during the general legislative session, which is January through March every year. Occasionally, we'll have a special session where a handful of bills will be considered for a special reason. And then once the bill is drafted, it has to go through a process of passing through a committee meeting and a vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. If it passes both of those bodies, it has one final check, the executive branch. The governor has the right to veto a bill or sign the bill. So that is the pathway for a bill becoming a law. But oftentimes people don't realize that some of the best bills come from ideas from constituents. So a relationship with your representative and senator are really important. Okay.
And that leads into another question, and I'll just stay with you, Suzanne. How comes crazy bills like the ability to shoot feral cats get through and actually get discussed, and or the idea to redo our flag. I mean, were people jumping up and down demanding that? That seems sort of odd. It just seems like, could that be just a distraction from something else? Or what about good bills, in my mind, like the end of life options bill that comes up every year and it gets killed in committee? It never even gets to a vote. Can you discuss that?
Yes. Well, this gets into a little bit of insider baseball, but any legislator has a right to open any bill file on any issue. Now, that, that's their right as a legislator. They can even open a bill file that's clearly unconstitutional, and we've had several examples of that. Now, there are some other very good examples of wonderful bills that don't even see the light of day because they get stuck in what's called the Rules Committee, which is a committee that before it gets to a public committee, a bill has to get out of the Rules Committee. And that is where many a wonderful bill goes to die. If someone doesn't like the bill in leadership, or if powerful people in the legislature are opposed to the bill for some reason, they can just kind of push for it behind the scenes to stay in the Rules Committee, and it won't ever get a public discussion. So
Is that what happens?
I've had bills that happened to, and I'm sure many other legislators have had a great bill die in the Rules Committee.
Is that what happened with the end of life options bill? Is it
I can't speak to that bill because I don't recall if it had a committee hearing or not. But many bills, I had a few air quality bills. I had some ethics in government campaign finance law bills that never got a committee hearing because they never got out of the Rules Committee. And this is one of the most important reasons why we need more balance in the Utah legislature politically, because if there were more balance, some of these issues there would not be such a super majority of one voice to keep some of these, like what you may think of as a good bill in a Rules Committee. If we had more balance politically, there would be more discussion of issues that matter to many voters.
Yeah. And I don't want to just, on the end of life options, it seems to me like a large portion of our population would like that. It would like to have the right to decide whether if they've got a terminal illness, whether they live or die, like in Oregon. And, I've been there to the Senate committee meeting, and there are 200 people in the room, and it gets, there's of the 200, 170 of them are in favor of the bill, and it still dies and never gets out of committee. Elizabeth, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, and I know that end of life options, the argument that comes up there is one about the relationship between an individual and God, and they literally bring that up. And then,
but that's fine. Nobody is saying if you are going to have to end your life. If that's between you and your God. But what about me and my God?
Well, and that's what we see, is that appearance of contradiction, because that argument is coming up here and not being sustained here, and that individual right to decide is coming up in 3 or 4 different situations now, and it's making contradictions. So,
okay.
And I'm going to say something really right here because I want to even repeat it. This is the kind of thing that I think is a good point to keep repeating as a question. Like, why does it apply here and not here? Because it's our individual conversations with our friends and families, not to argue, but just to raise the question like, gee, it seems contradictory for a concept to apply here, but not here. And I really do believe that the more we talk with and keep those issues alive, that the more people can hear them.
Like which issues? What are some examples?
Well, like end of life options and abortion issues and the transgender issues. And all of those that so many of us recognize as really personal, private decisions, that now we're seeing those contradictions of they'll apply law here, but uphold individual rights here. And I'm just thinking of those contradictions. I do want to say something about the state flag at some point.
Okay, go for it. Let's do it.
So the state flag, because this is another one of the questions that Mark said to us. We went through, I think, 3 sessions with 4 different bills raising the issue of a new state flag. It got persistent enough that it became pretty obvious that somebody was going to make a new state flag happen. So I voted against it for the same reasons that Mark is saying that. And it's true. Nobody in this state was making a big deal about having a new state flag, except a small number of people who wanted their flag or a flag to be the new state flag. So one person in particular kept bringing that bill and getting the bill in, and it got to the point where finally it was a process bill, not just a selection of a new flag. It was a process bill. So I told the sponsor that I would support that and speak for it if I could be on the task force, and so I am. I'm on the state flag task force, and I'm pretty much a convert to.
But do you feel like some bills are run just as a distraction to stay away from other issues? It fills up the time.
I think they can end up being that. I don't know if any of them are intentionally run to be distractions. The state flag bill was not run as a distraction. It kind of became one. And that's actually why I voted to support it. Let's do the process.
Oh, let's just get it done and move on.
Well, and let's get it done, but as a process. So I promote that bill because it's a process. And in any day now, I'm just waiting for the call. We're supposed to see the narrowed down selection of submissions of flag designs that are in the selection from the almost 7,000 submitted. So I'm excited and I'm promoting it. But in terms of distraction, I don't think it was. I'll tell you that every legislator, particularly good legislators that run bills, they're dedicated to those bills and they will work them through almost all the time. I have seen a couple legislators in committees, literally. I'm thinking of one situation last year who literally said, I really don't care if this bill passes or not. He was running it. It got introduced in committee. It got to a vote. I was kind of astonished to see him say, oh, well, and he literally did that in committee. But most of the time, they're dedicated to them.
Okay. Changing subject just a little bit. Mental health. Everybody, I think, can agree that mental health is key to so many of our social problems. And Suzanne, maybe I'll ask you as a doctor to address this. It seems like there would be a great argument to say, hey, if we fund better treatment for mental health and identifying people that have problems, it could cut down on drug use, crime. It actually could pay for itself by the benefits to society. Do those discussions go on in the legislature?
Well,
Suzanne?
Certainly we need to have more such discussions. One of the most important things we've done for mental health recently, though, was expanding Medicaid, because some of our most vulnerable members in our community didn't have any access to healthcare prior to Medicaid getting expanded. And Utah was very slow to get on board with this fiscally. It was a really important choice for Utah to expand Medicaid because it freed up a lot of our state budget to meet other needs. There's so much more work to be done though, Mark, and you're spot on. If we can move upstream and help get people the help that they need when the problem is little, or when we just need a little bit of tweak with help with mental health rather than waiting till it's a full-blown crisis. We know that mental health challenges contribute to our homelessness, to our, substance use disorders. It's a huge problem. And it's not just about adding money to it, which is part of the solution. We definitely need more funding for mental health services. We need to also invest in developing the workforce for mental health services. Yeah. We don't have enough people in the pipeline in graduate programs. We need to expand training programs. We need to expand investment in helping people get that training, because we don't physically have the workforce here to meet the needs, even if the funding were addressed.
Okay, so the workforce is one issue. The funding, of course, is another, and
they're both very important.
But has the state done much to tell people about the Medicaid, the mental health provisions in Medicaid, or just Medicaid, that they've got it now? Aren't there a lot of people that don't know they have it?
Well, yes, yes. And unfortunately, the voters voted definitively to expand Medicaid in 2018, you may remember, but the legislature meddled with it and delayed expansion of Medicaid for, I think it was at least 2 years. Liz may know the exact date, but it cost lives, and it cost us a lot of money too. I think if we had expanded Medicaid sooner, it would have shifted some of that cost burden to the federal government. We were already funding that in other states. It didn't make sense to me that we didn't expand Medicaid earlier in order to get people the help that they need, but also to help with our fiscal bottom line as Utah taxpayers.
Yeah, well,
because the people were getting the help one way or another, mostly by showing up in ERs in a crisis.
Right. And but didn't the courts have something to say about that? Weren't they the ones that said, hey, you have to expand Medicaid?
It ended up being a bill that said if they didn't get the waiver by X date, they would have to expand it. And they did not get the waiver. Finally, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You probably have.
No, that's fine. But okay, then it finally got through. What kind of marketing effort has gone on to tell people that they've got this benefit?
That's one of the other areas that I ask that question often about homelessness and mental health, because unless somebody is in a situation and has to learn about it kind of in the moment, people aren't generally aware of it. And that might be just reality, that until we need something, we don't learn how to access the resources. But caseworker is a really big word for me in dealing with so many of these issues, because we don't have sufficient people to help guide other people to the resources that they need. And that comes up really frequently with the homeless population, because people in homelessness are not aware a lot of times, and these are kids too, aren't aware of resources that are available to them, and the caseworkers aren't sufficient. There aren't enough of them to let people know. And one of the caseworker situations that I'm aware of is all of our schools now have school psychologists. So we have school counselors, which have some psychology training, and we think that that's where the psychology work starts. But we now have school psychologists. But in my neighborhood, it's typical for a school psychologist to be assigned to 3 or 4 different schools, be able to spend 1.5 or 2 days in each school. So if there's a situation that develops in one school and the psychologist is at the other school, those kids have to wait or just miss out. And sometimes there's good communication but it gets really patchy. And that's where mental health and mental health awareness, I think, can really start, so that kids are aware that they don't have to get to breakdown point before they understand to talk to somebody. So that clear down with junior high, even elementary age kids, for them to be aware through our education system, I think makes a big difference.
Okay.
It's all
Okay.
part of the picture.
Did you have a comment, Suzanne?
Oh,
Okay. Just moving along through the list here, I've kind of jumped around, but if each of you, and I'll take you first, Suzanne, what were some of the surprises when you got elected and found yourself in the legislature? And what are some examples of success when you worked across the aisle?
Great question. I think one of the most surprising things was that people were friendly. Like, I was worried it would be some sort of, people be super mean and extremely tribal. And while there is some partisan stuff and there is some tribalism, there are so many lovely people up there, and it's been a pleasure to meet people from all over the state. One of the other surprises was that there is a willingness to work on issues, and there's some broad bipartisan support for several issues. I think the majority of bills get passed in a overwhelmingly bipartisan manner up there. There are definitely some areas where there's disagreement, but I was surprised at how many bills pass in a very bipartisan manner.
Okay, well that's good. And then working across the aisle, do you have an example of something where that was successful?
Yeah. Well, every single bill that I passed
we're losing you.
Had a Republican Senate spending that I tried to do because oops.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
I'm at my house now, so I'll run in. But the district that I represent does not have it's very Republican leaning. And so it was important to me to work across the aisle and make sure that my constituents knew that I saw them, that I heard them, and that I valued
Okay.
that bipartisan work. And so diabetes program this year to expand access to diabetes prevention in the legislature.
Okay. Well, great. I'm going to pose the same question to Elizabeth, and maybe you can turn your camera off and run inside, and we'll pick you up in a few minutes. So, Elizabeth, what were some surprises when you got into the legislature, and what were some examples of working across the aisle?
So there's definitely a learning curve at the legislature, and there's a lot to learn all at once. And so I wasn't necessarily surprised at that, but it was interesting to me to see different attitudes toward that. And some people were supported more than others. And some people were more open to conversation and learning that. And we all learn in our own ways, but the bipartisan part is absolutely right. Suzanne's right. So I do tours at the state capitol, and one of the things that I emphasize to the student groups particularly is that we end up with between 500 and 600 bills on the House floor every year, and very few of those are controversial. We can have some debates and some clarification and votes, but not very often do those bills pass with very much tension. And this kind of goes to one of the questions that's coming up later. One of the things that can take place, and this is one of those extra civics class things, there are times when it does become a partisan vote, and the Democrats want to make a point about that and make sure that the record is clear who votes which way, especially when it gets down to an amendment. So in the final vote on a bill, that's clearly put in the journal with every single name and yay or nay by it. But if a bill is amended, and sometimes I or another Democrat or another person, this can go with anybody, will propose an amendment, and there's a voice vote on that. It's not a recorded individual vote. So we basically talk about this. It's a strategy to make sure that everybody can see who votes which way on that amendment. So there's a process that when a voice vote is taken, if you want to make sure it's on the record as an individual vote, someone can just shout out, and we do. We did this more last session than I had seen before. Division. They just shout division. And then the speaker kind of stops and calls for at least 10 people to stand up and acknowledge that division. So there are 17 of us, and we can all stand up, and other people do also. And then that vote goes to a board count and a recorded person-to-person vote. So we do that even knowing that the amendment may not pass, but then there's a record, and everybody can see who voted which way on the amendment. And sometimes those amendments make their own statement on a bill.
Did that happen on the gerrymandering bill that
Yes.
undermined?
Yeah, in fact, I think, Suzanne, did you introduce an amendment or a substitute bill that went through that process on the redistricting?
I did. I introduced a bill to adopt one of the Better Boundaries endorsed maps that was written by the Independent Redistricting Committee. I also tried to introduce that on another vote, but was shot down. But yeah, the bill that I tried to substitute did not pass.
But the call for division ended up resulting in, instead of a voice vote, where the speaker just calls, I rule that passes or doesn't pass, that vote got recorded. So it's a matter of public record how every individual in the House voted on that substitution or that amendment. I think it was a substitute. Yeah.
Okay. Moving along, because we're running out of time here. We got to get to the Q&A.
Yeah.
But what, and this is for each of you, I'll go to you, Suzanne, first. What do you recall were some of the key bills in last session, this year, and what do you see coming up for this coming year, 2023? Could you just give a couple examples?
I'm going to turf that to Liz first. I'm trying to think of what would be.
I was trying to think too, because we all got really, we all noticed because of the last 3 hours of our legislative session were basically distracted, and there were some really good bills on the Senate board when that transgender girls sports bill was substituted. So I don't even know how many. I had 2 bills there, and I know there were some important bills there. And so at the last minute, so for those of you who don't know what happened in terms of process, when Suzanne described that very caring, careful process of going through committees and having opportunity for public input, the bill that was substituted in the Senate at 9:00 p.m. was introduced with no opportunity for any public input. There were no committee meetings. At that point, the committee meetings were done, and that bill was able to be substituted for another bill. It was a dramatic shift from what had been passed in the House. And the debate about that went on for a little over an hour. And what we were all doing is thinking, okay, so is this bill going to pass in the Senate or not? And then it will come back to the House. So then the whole rest of the night, almost the whole rest of the night until 11 o'clock, turned into strategizing in both bodies and in both parts of both bodies to decide how best to use the time. So the bill was on the Senate floor. It came back to the House. There were some speeches we knew it was going to pass. So we spoke against it and voted against it, but we didn't want to take a lot more time on it so that we could get to other issues. So that turned out to be a really, really important bill, partly because it distracted from so much other good discussion and good legislation getting.
And did some bills just die because that pushed them away?
Yep.
Oh, no. How about this? How about this year? What do you see coming up for this year?
Well, I'm anticipating bills to create the state laws about abortion, because that's where we are now. And now that it goes to the state, since Roe v. Wade turned over, it goes to the state. And we already are expecting bills that will put into law more definitively, because the two bills that were passed, the two bills that have become a point since Roe v. Wade was overturned, one's in court now, and I think both of them are on. No, one's in court, and the other one is a less restrictive bill. But we know that laws are going to be introduced to more carefully define restrictions, so that the questions that come up with those two bills will be answered and put in and introduced for laws. So we know that.
Okay. Suzanne?
I thought of an answer.
Okay.
I agree with what Liz said as well. For years and years, many Democrats have worked on water conservation. Yeah. And I had water conservation legislation that didn't go anywhere. And finally this year, I am glad to see many of our Republican colleagues also agree that water conservation, and especially as it relates to saving the Great Salt Lake, there was finally some substantive and very important work done on that. There is still so much work ahead, especially in working to stop diverting as much water from our rivers and streams and try and get more of that water to the Great Salt Lake. There's still a lot of talk about pipelines that are extremely expensive and unnecessary, in my opinion. If we can just help increase agricultural efficiencies, we need to have conversations about water pricing and the types of crops that we're growing in the second driest state in the country. But I was very happy to vote for and co-sponsor some important bills on water conservation. In terms of things that I see on the horizon that are concerning to me, I think we have seen a host of legislation undermining public education in our state, trying to divert money from our public schools to private interests, and also increasingly pretty blatant attacks on teachers and just curriculum that is in the common interest. And I think there is a more and more vocal group of people that want to use tax dollars to teach very extreme Christian ideology. And I think we need to be vigilant to make sure that we are adhering to the US Constitution, that we do not have a state-run religion, and that we make sure that we're having, of course, we want parents involved in education and decisions, but we need to make sure that we're teaching every child, giving every child critical thinking skills and the tools they need to thrive in the future economy.
Okay. Moving along. This is my last sort of two questions for each of you. Suzanne, I'll stay with you. In your own campaigns, what's the impact of money? I mean, you can never have too much. About what does it cost to run for the Utah legislature? I mean, around numbers. And then what are you hearing on the campaign trail, Suzanne? And then the same thing for Liz once you're through.
Okay, so a couple thoughts. Just as an overarching thing, I think in our country, we have a problem with the influence of money in politics. I would love to see Citizens United, which was a Supreme Court decision that allowed even more money to flood into our political system. I would love to see a constitutional amendment, and that would take a whole bunch of work that is way above my pay grade. But having said that, it does take money to run a campaign. And I think, I wish it weren't so. I would love to see publicly funded campaigns. We're not anywhere near that in our country, but it does cost money to run a legislative race. I don't know, Liz, you can chime in too. 30 to 50,000 plus or minus. For a House district, it costs a little bit more. For a Senate district, I'm running for the county council at large, which is the entire county council. Which is entire Salt Lake County, 1.2 million people. My goal is to raise $350,000 to run for this office. It's a big seat. So wow. That gives you a little bit of an idea.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And then let's see.
I would also add that we need some more campaign finance laws and restrictions in Utah, because it's definitely the Wild West in terms of potential conflicts of interest.
Right. And then what are you hearing on the campaign trail, Suzanne?
So sorry, I forgot. Cost of living. People are really struggling, and that is my top priority. How can I help people in this community afford to live here? Liz and I have been fighting the food tax for a long time, and we have Representative Rosemary Lesser, who's been introducing that bill. We are all behind her. There are things we can do as leaders to help people afford to live here. We need to invest more in affordable housing in communities, and making sure that we have that top of mind, how we can help regular working families. That's number one, number two, and number three.
Okay, Liz.
So I agree with Suzanne that what we're hearing is just cost of living and all of the pieces that create that cost of living picture, because she lives in an area that has a pretty different, I'll just call it standard of living and income level from the district that I represent. Whoops, just a second. Hold on just a second. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Somehow I've lost there I am. I lost the screen. In my area, there are lots and lots and lots of kids. So in the area that I'm campaigning in this year, 26% of my population that I represent are school age kids. Wow. So that means 26% of the population are not voting age, but I represent them. But then I want to talk to their parents. And that's the second largest population group, are 25 to 45. They're the parents. So they're really interested in the education for their kids. And I'm not hearing radical concerns about education. They're really interested in hearing problem-solving approach, down to earth. They're concerned about class size. They're concerned about teacher pay. They're concerned about the kind of traditional things. However, I am running every single time I'm knocking on doors. I meet at least one person who is very concerned and spends quite a bit of time in often caring, friendly ways, expressing his concern or her concern about the country because Trump isn't president. Literally. And so the message that I get from that is these people believe that. They are not angry, crazy people. They are believers. And I'm not saying that, crazy comes to mind, but they really believe that this country is in trouble. And then they'll say,
wait a minute, because they say the country's in trouble
Because
the
Trump
election
didn't-
was stolen from?
No, they actually believe that, well, yeah, because the election was stolen, but because Trump isn't the leader and because Biden is and Pelosi, so they name all the
How can
Democrats.
anybody hate Biden?
Well,
He's your
so,
grandfather.
well, they are worried, and that's why I'm telling you this, because
Okay.
it's not a matter of debate, it's a matter of belief. And I
Okay.
have understood to make that distinction now, that it's not a debate, it's a belief. It's like talking to somebody
Right.
and about a religion.
Right.
That
Right.
and the more I listen, as if I were listening to them talk about their religion,
Yeah.
the better I can relate to them. So
Okay.
Consistently, my conversations are take time, listen, we part as friends. The last one I had with a person last weekend, he is going to be praying for me in earnest, because I am a believer of something that is just wrong, and he's very sad for me. But I'm letting you know that, because this is not regular political debate and analytic conversation. It's not
Right.
critical thinking. It's on the level of belief. So what I've determined is that we all need to just keep listening, but standing in our beliefs and standing on what we see and know, not necessarily thinking we're going to convince anybody, but just to keep that definition there. I really believe in persistence.
I think that's the perfect point to take a time out, Tristan, wherever you are. Let us do our put the thing up for donations, and then we'll come back in just a minute or two and have Q&A. So be ready with your questions. And I don't do chat, so you're going to have to just raise your hand, and I'll try and, be aggressive about it if it's taken a little while. And I'll call on you. Keep your questions short. Don't make a speech. And you people, Liz and Suzanne, don't make your answers too long so we can get to everybody. Okay, Tristan, put us into the wherever. Okay, so Tristan, what if everybody can behave themselves? Why don't we just unmute everybody? Or let everybody be able to talk. And then if you've got a question, raise your hand and I'll call on you. Okay, Steve, I see you.
Thank you, Mark. So I live in a district where I generally approve of the way my representative and senator votes. I'd like to have influence on representatives in other districts who might not share my views so much. What's the best way to open a discussion with those people? Or is it, are they overwhelmed with emails and they're not going to look at something from outside their district?
Who wants to handle that, Suzanne or Liz?
I can. That's a great question, Steve. Thank you. So typically I prioritize my constituents first. That is the people that I was elected to represent. I think the best way for you to influence other legislators is through an organization that advocates and lobbies for the issues that you care about. For example, like, I don't know what one would be, but like Heal Utah on local environmental issues, or, there's all sorts of groups that advocate for issues at the legislature and talk to different legislators to advocate for or against bills. But pick a couple of those that you support and get involved with volunteering with them. They have, different organizations have volunteers up on the Hill lobbying for those issues. And that's, I think, one of the more effective ways to influence someone who's not your immediate elected official.
I agree. And I also suggest, even as part of that organizational structure, keeping in touch with your local elected officials in your city and the county. because there is an organization called the Utah League of Cities and Towns that gets information from from the local leadership, and the local leadership are influenced by the people who live in their municipalities. So having a voice with your local elected leadership makes a difference.
Yep. One more thing, there are like races throughout the county. Go like volunteer and help a candidate that advocates for issues that you care about, or to like add some more, whatever it is that you care about in, find a candidate that's not in your immediate district, go knock doors for them. I just was doing that tonight. It would be a huge help to any campaign. You're all invited to come help me. Like, I'm sure Liz would love it too. Like, go find someone and go do, this is the work of democracy. So it would be a huge help to anybody.
Right. And I'll chime in there. I've worked on a number of campaigns, and it's really enjoyable.
Yeah.
And sometimes
Mark's come out to my neighborhood to watch.
And me too. Thank you, Mark.
Well, but we're not here to promote anybody. But it is so important. And right now they need your money so they can get yard signs printed up and bumper stickers printed up, and they can run their campaign organization. We just heard how much it costs. So, but find the candidates. You can go to your favorite party website. They all have the list of candidates, and they have their websites, and you can click on those and you can learn more about them. This is where the rubber hits the road in politics, and maybe the person in your district you don't like so much, you don't agree with them. Find out then who is running against them and help them out. But it's probably best to kind of try and focus on races that are winnable, that if it's just a landslide, there's no chance. You probably ought to put your focus on areas where there is a chance. So, and this is at the national level too. I think we need, as much as we like local politics, we need to be paying attention at the national level too. And that may involve getting on the phone and making some calls. So I thought I'd throw that in. Okay, who's got the next question?
I have a question.
Okay, Jim.
Thank you to both of you for doing what appears to many of us on the outside to be a very difficult and at times thankless job, considering our party affiliations. But what percentage of bills that get passed are actually initiated by Democrats? Just a rough, approximation, are initiated by Democrats. And if that's zero, what percentage of bills have some degree of Democratic Party input, either in the formation of the bill or how it comes out in its final form? What?
I know we keep statistics on that because we literally watch for the degree of our influence on bills, and we know that there is influence from the Democratic side. We know that there are important bills passed every year that, if they're not sponsored by Democrats, would not be passing without Democratic support. And I can also tell you that every Democratic legislator passes between 1 and 20 bills a year, and 20 is not me. That would be Senator Maine. And I know Suzanne passes a lot of bills, or introduces a lot of bills and gets a lot of them passed. I think most of us end up working on 3 to 7 bills. So those are the bills we introduce. Sometimes we introduce bills that we don't expect to get passed, but we want to continue raising the voice of Utahns that are not heard in bills like gun safety bills, that are not heard in bills from many other legislators. So I don't know the statistics, but I can tell you that we keep them because we want to be sure to acknowledge ourselves, and then we can we can tell you that it does make a difference to have even 17 Democrats. and we're an influence up there.
Definitely. I agree. I'm sorry, I don't know the statistics either, but I agree with what Liz said.
I'm just looking in. Oh, and I'm just going to point out to everybody in the chat, Joan has posted the link to the judge performance evaluation. That's not from the Judicial Conduct Commission. That's a separate evaluation, but boy, is it thorough. And it's created from comments submitted by people who have been involved with those judges in some way.
Before we move off that issue, I just want to, is that the evaluation that's done by attorneys?
It's attorneys, but it's also people who have appeared in their courtrooms.
Okay.
But yeah, attorneys do that. But as I recall, there are also, and I think it's in this system where people who have appeared before them can also, and I don't know whether every single comment is there, but I think anytime anybody has an interaction in a courtroom, they have that access and option to submit about that judge.
I've looked at that list, and sometimes the numbers seem fairly low, like in the 70% and things like that. That would be like a C grade or less in a classroom. And I wonder what is considered a good percentage vote that suggests that a judge is doing a good job?
Higher than that. And I'll tell you that a lot of times when judges get low evaluations, they will retire before they'll run for retention, particularly if they get from the Judicial Conduct Commission, if they go through a situation with us that heads for the Supreme Court, and that's where our recommendations go, they will retire instead of face retention votes. Mm-hmm. So if they get evaluated and they haven't retired, often they're still worth keeping there, because again, I can tell you that the process for placing judges in Utah is really thorough and good. We do get into some situations where with local judges, because they're very local, and sometimes they're spread too thin. So there is an issue about funding to have sufficient judges. The Supreme Court comes to the legislature every single year. Chief Justice Durant delivers a State of the Judiciary speech to the legislature every year. And in that, he will regularly tell us that they can use X amount of additional funding for the judicial branch.
Yeah, we're got to wrap this up, and Suzanne's got to go. I think everybody's got things, but is there one last question that someone wants to ask? No? We've confused everybody? Okay. Well, before you go, I saw a fabulous show on PBS last night. It was called The Bolsonaros, as in the president of Brazil, and he's got 3 sons, and it's about what's going on there. And the guy sound like he's really corrupt. It was on PBS. You can watch it. I highly encourage you to watch it because there are so many parallels with this country. And he's up for election this October, right before our elections. And he said he's in power now. He said he's not going to step down no matter what, whether he wins or loses. So just interesting one. And if you're into the climate change and all those issues, this guy has probably had more impact on our world climate than anybody ever, because he's given the green light to deforestation in the Amazon. They burned it, mined it, put cattle grazing in there. I mean, it's a 2-hour program, but it's really interesting, and it's sort of something. It's sort of maybe anyway. I liked it. So, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Liz. Thank you,
I think Liz has
Suzanne.
one last question or comment.
Okay.
So my hand's up because I wanted to let you all know that I do tours at the state capitol, but out of that grew an interest to kind of expand the opportunity to teach people, particularly young people, but people in general. It's just turned into this about what the part of the legislative process that happens in committees. Because what happens in committees is the part where we can all show up, and now we can show up remotely because all the committee hearings are conducted on Zoom as well as live in the room. But one of the things that a staff person and I put together were committee simulations, and we can actually reserve a committee room, take a group of people in, put them in committee chairs, put them in public comment chairs, and run a committee meeting so that people can become aware of the 4 required steps in a legislative committee and actually go through discussion and public comment and watch the bill. And we use real legislation in those simulations. We've done it with adults. We've done it with 8th graders. We're doing it with high school students coming up. But if any of you would be interested in that, we can put together a group and do that, because it's a really different experience, and it lets you see and experience that process. So you're invited.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Suzanne. Let's give them a big round of applause.
Thanks, Mark.
It's really fantastic. You can't get this anywhere else, huh?
Thank you for letting us join you. It was really delightful and such good questions and a great group of people. Thank you.
Really good. And thank you, Tristan, wherever you are. He's our technical guy. He made this whole thing work. He's been fabulous all summer long. And
thank you, Tristan.
Suzanne, if you're interested at all, on our First Unitarian website, we had 10 summer programs, and we covered gerrymandering, mental health. I mean, there's all kinds of things, and there's sort of versions of this if you want to see what was said. And you're well, I'm sure you're not bored at all now. But after the legislature's over, you can watch those.
Oh, thank you. It's fantastic. Thank you for a wonderful group of people.
Yep.
So quickly on that point, Mark, this has been recorded. Will it be on the website also?
I think so. It usually takes about a week for it to come up.
Right.
Okay. Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Have a good one.